Hello, everybody. This is Gary. Today is September 28th, 2021. It is 8:18 p.m. Eastern Standard Time in the United States in Rochester, New York. And this is my Coping with Schizophrenia blog entry for today. Today, I wanted to talk about mental hospitals and their use of physical restraints on psychiatric patients. Do hospitals, both private and state mental hospitals, still restrain people forcibly against their will? And the answer to that question is yes, they do. I have been to many mental hospitals since I was 18 years old. When I first went into a state mental hospital in Rochester, New York, called Rochester Psychiatric Center. Um, Mental hospitals, at least in the United States, and certainly in New York State, do have the right to restrain people physically if they become potentially violent or they start acting violent. Um, I have seen this time and time again. I have been physically restraining myself in mental hospitals. They can do it in various ways. They can put you into a room by yourself where the door is locked, but you're not necessarily restrained by anything in terms of belts or straitjackets or anything like that. The first time that I was physically restrained at Rochester Psychiatric Center, the state hospital in Rochester, New York, I was thrown into a seclusion room, they called it. The odd thing was I wasn't physically restrained by any straps to a bed or anything like that. They didn't use a straitjacket. They did remove my clothes, gave me a shot of Thorazine forcibly up my butt, and threw me into a room for 2 hours until I calmed down. And then the psychiatrist would reevaluate the situation and decide if I needed to spend another 2 hours in the room or if I would be let out of the room if I was calm enough. And since then, I can think of dozens and dozens of times that I've been physically restrained in mental hospitals. In private mental hospitals, I've been restrained to a bed with what's called 5-point restraints. They put a restraint around your head, your arms, more accurately, your wrists and your ankles, and you're given a shot of medication to calm you down while you're strapped to the table or the gurney or the bed. Um, this is perfectly legal. Psychiatric hospitals still do it. They do it in the psychiatric emergency room. The last time, a couple of times I've been to the psychiatric emergency room, I've seen plenty of people come up, complain that they were in the psychiatric ward or the emergency room, I should say, against them. They would start acting violently. They would start punching the walls, punching the windows, not necessarily hitting other people, but they would be acting violently, yelling and screaming. And then they would call up the security guards, and you get like 6, 7, 8 big security guards, big muscular guys, strapping somebody down while the psychiatrist and the nurses would inject medications into them against their will. This is perfectly legal. It's certainly perfectly legal in New York State. The idea behind it is to make the other patients and staff safe instead of letting the person become violent and running amok through the emergency room. The psychiatric emergency room is usually overcrowded. It's a locked facility where you have to stay until you can get evaluated by a psychiatrist, and that can be for hours. The last time I went to the psychiatric emergency room, I wasn't restrained myself. Saw a couple other people who were restrained, and the psychiatric emergency room was packed. It's a locked facility, and people get on each other's nerves and they become angry and potentially violent, and then they end up getting strapped down. Um, I've been strapped down while I was actually admitted into the hospital, which is a stage after being in the psychiatric emergency room. Where you're actually admitted into the hospital as a formal patient, either as a volunteer admission or an involuntary admission. Um, but once I got up to the ward, I have been certainly physically restrained to a bed with straps on my arms and legs and on my forehead, and then injected with medication. Usually a combination, I believe it's Haldol, which is an antipsychotic medication, and Ativan, which is a benzodiazepine, and Benadryl, which is an antihistamine, but it also, I guess, helps calm you down, so they inject that into you. Now, you're given the option, usually, to take the medication voluntarily and calm down that way, or you're forcibly restrained and then given the medication. So I've been restrained plenty of times. Question is, should sorry, should mental hospitals have the right to restrain people like that and inject medication against their wills? Does it violate their civil rights? Well, actually, mental hospitals should have a right to do that. They have to protect the nursing staff and the other patients from physical harm. Because if they didn't, they could be sued for not taking precautions to protect patients and staff. Um, Very rarely would a person who's restrained be able to sue the hospital and win any damages. The whole point of restraint is to protect other people from a person who's becoming violent. If you're becoming violent or potentially violent and aggressive and dangerous to other people, you're not going to have much of a lawsuit if you're the one being restrained. In New York State, there are laws that govern how and when a person can be restrained and who does the restraining, and then it be done as safely as possible. Um, Mental hospitals, psychiatric hospitals need the right to restrain people. Um, that sounds like an old, horrible scene out of the movie One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest. But One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest is not an accurate uh, portrayal of the way mental hospitals work today. They don't use straitjackets anymore. They use restraints on a gurney or on a bed, and they use medications. Um, Medications today are much more successful at calming people down, getting them into the right state of mind so they can be taken out of the restraints within 1 or 2 hours after being restrained. Um, the scenes in the movie, The One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest, where they force lobotomies on people and use straitjackets and things like that. Or using electroshock treatments without anesthesia. They don't do those things anymore. Electroconvulsive therapy is still used. I've gone through it myself. It's not that big of a deal. They give you muscle relaxants so your body doesn't go into convulsions. They use general anesthesia so you don't feel anything. So when they actually do the electroconvulsive therapy, the electroshock therapy, you're actually unconscious and fully relaxed by muscle relaxants. And it's a purely voluntary treatment that I've gone through, and I found it helpful. But aside from that, psychiatric hospitals need the right to restrain people, to protect themselves from lawsuits, to protect the person who's becoming violent from being hurt, and also other staff and other patients from being hurt. And there are laws in New York State that govern how this is to be done. Each state has its own rules, but generally throughout the 50 states in the United States, Using psychiatric restraints forcibly against somebody's will is perfectly legal. There are laws on the books to protect people's civil rights and balance that against the protection of other patients and psychiatric staff from being harmed, because my right to not be restrained ends where other people's safety begins. I don't have the right as a psychiatric patient to harm nursing staff, medical staff, psychiatric staff. I don't have the right to punch, hit, kick, yell, scream at people, threaten them. So psychiatric hospitals have to be able to restrain people for everybody's protection, including the person who's flipping out. Um, I'm generally not a violent person. I don't go around hitting people randomly. I don't attack people. Even when I'm attacked, I'm not much of a fighter. I'm not much for one for being able to defend myself. Not that I wouldn't try, but I would probably easily lose a fight, even if I'm not the one who started it, and especially if I was the one who did start it. Um, I don't have a criminal record because I'm not a violent person. Um, I generally don't go around assaulting people. But if I'm in a mental hospital and I start getting angry, yelling, and screaming, I don't have the right to hurt other people in or outside of a mental hospital. My being a psychiatric patient is not an excuse for me to harm myself or other people. I don't have a right to become violent. I don't have a right to commit suicide. I don't have a right to cut and harm myself. I don't have a right to put myself and other people in danger. It simply isn't okay to do that. And so inpatient psychiatric mental hospitals and even outpatient mental health clinics, which also have security guards or public safety officers, as they're often called, they have a right to protect other clients, other patients, and the medical and psychiatric staff. They have a right to keep them from being harmed, and they have a right to keep the person who's putting other people in danger from harming themselves. So, yes, psychiatric patients or psychiatric hospitals do restrain people. They restrain them in outpatient clinics if necessary. They restrain them in psychiatric emergency rooms if necessary. And they restrain them in psychiatric inpatients if necessary. Because you don't have the right to violate other people. Being a psychiatric patient, whether you're there because you're psychotic, or you're depressed, or you're anxious, or you're hallucinating, or you're delusional, or whatever your psychiatric situation is, whatever your diagnosis is, you don't have a right to harm yourself and harm other people. Suicide and violence are not civil rights. You don't have a right to put other people in danger just because you have psychiatric problems. And nobody's obligated to allow you to be harmful to other people inside a mental institution, be it inpatient or outpatient. If I went to my outpatient clinic to see my psychiatrist, for example, and I was in his office and we were just talking, and then suddenly I became really agitated, started threatening my doctor. Well, there are security guards even at the outpatient mental health facility where I would be restrained and, if necessary, taken to the psychiatric emergency room for evaluation. And I would be forced to go under evaluation if I became dangerous to anyone, outpatient or inpatient. That's why when I do go to the psychiatric emergency room, the police show up before the ambulance. They have to make sure that I'm not violent or suicidal and that I'm not going to harm the ambulance staff. whether I'm going voluntarily or involuntarily. The police show up first for a reason, and then if everything's copacetic, then I'll be put to the ambulance and taken to the hospital for evaluation. But my civil rights end where other people's safety begins, and that's just common sense. Like, share, comment, subscribe, press the notification bell when I put out a new video, and if you want me to do a video on a specific topic, let me know in the comment section.